What is up, guys? Rick Kakis here, and recently, the Survival DLC hit The Division, introducing, of course, the Survival Game Mode, an extremely fun new experience for The Division, bringing a ton of people back to this game. However, a lot of people have set out in the Survival Game Mode, but not nearly as many have actually extracted, and that's why today, we're going to be going over my top 5 tips for, well, surviving survival mode in The Division. Now, these tips aren't necessarily in a super particular order, however, the last tip is very important. It's at the end of the video because it is kind of the longest tip. It is a mega tip encompassing a bunch of mini tips that, again, are all very important. But without further ado, let's get started here with tip number 1. And before I start the video, I should say that all of these tips do apply to both the PvP and PvE sections of survival. So again, let's get started here with tip number 1, which is loot everything right away and equip it later. Now, the first section, loot everything right away, that does apply a little bit more to PvE. You want to pick stuff up as soon as you can. Of course, kill enemies before picking up loot, but get to that loot quickly and pick it up for yourself immediately. You don't want to be lollygagging and standing around with a giant, purple or blue pillar showing all nearby opponents where you are. And if you're in PvE, I've had several times where teammates are standing there with a, does anyone want this purple chess piece? And a random player runs by, jacks the chess piece, and keeps running. Like, that actually can happen. So pick up stuff right away. You can always share it later with your teammates. And in PvP, it's extremely important for the second part of that tip, which is equip stuff later. You don't want to be opening your inventory and deciding, which gloves should I put on? I mean, this one increases firearms by more, but this one increases stamina by more. It is not the time to do that. It is a terrible idea to get to a helicopter crash first and stand there with your inventory open, especially in PvP. Get to a hideout or another secluded safe space before opening your inventory and equipping things, with the one exception being weapons. If you get your first blue assault rifle and all you have is a pistol, of course, open your inventory really quickly and equip it as fast as you can. But again, don't be standing anywhere in the open with your inventory open equipping things. Now, moving on, tip number 2 is stay on top of your consumables. And again, this is kind of like a mega tip because first off, use your consumables relatively sooner rather than later. Use them whenever you can. When you're thirsty, drink something. When you're hungry, eat something. When you're sick, use medicine and painkillers right away. Especially the medicine and painkillers part, because as your illness progresses, they're going to be less effective. Medicine is going to delay your illness countdown for a smaller amount of time when you have severe sepsis than when you use it right away. So you're actually getting more time to survive your illness countdown when you're using this stuff right away. Of course, don't use it when it's ineffective. Use it when it's actually counting down. But also, you want to stay on top of using stuff in your inventory, using your consumables whenever you can, because you can only hold 3 of them. It's kind of pointless to be extracting when you have 3 canned foods. You probably should have used that stuff earlier. Now, speaking of eating stuff, speaking of canned foods and energy bars, you want to use that stuff in the earlier stages to heal yourself rather than wasting your med kits, which are going to be in relatively short supply and you can also use for skills. Using canned food or an energy bar will immediately start your health regeneration and will heal you. It just won't be instant. Additionally, drink water before you enter a good place to loot. If you're entering an apartment building, a landmark, drink some water beforehand. It will literally let you see through walls to every loot box nearby. So it'll let you see if there's loot on top of roofs, in different corners, all of this stuff, and it's very effective for getting all of the loot in a certain area. So again, stay on top of your consumables. It's very easy to go an entire survival match and never drink anything, but you're definitely going to end up with less loot and a harder experience because of that overall. Now moving on, tip number 3 is prioritize healing skills. There are very useful skills that aren't healing skills. Ballistic shield is extremely useful, turret can be quite useful as well, but prioritizing healing skills is very important because the only other way to heal yourself is to be using either consumables or medkits, and you kind of don't want to be using your consumables, using up stuff, when you could just be using a constantly recharging ability, and ignoring healing skills is going to put you in a very bad position if you get in a big firefight and then you have no medkits, no food, and low health. Like, you really don't want to be in that position. So I really would recommend getting first aid or support station first, and then getting pretty much whatever other skill you want. Pulse is very useful. Again, ballistic shield, turret, those are all useful skills, but get a healing skill first. Get that out of the way first. You're going to be able to get a ton of use out of those healing skills, and again, kind of stockpile med kits and your food consumables for harder firefights when you actually need them. Now moving on, tip number 4 is gear up before entering the next stage. Now what I mean by this is that survival is kind of broken up into these different stages. Stage 1 is just looting and equipping yourself for the dark zone. Stage 2 is being in the dark zone, gathering loot you want to extract, and stage 3 is actually extracting. You definitely want to make sure you have good enough gear before continuing on into the next section. For example, before you ever enter the dark zone, you have to make sure that you should at least have 2 decent blue weapons. Like, make sure you have a blue assault rifle and a blue SMG or a blue LMG, and really preferably you'd want to have at least 1 purple weapon first, and try to make sure you're not entering the dark zone without at least having most of your gear being blue or better. Do not try to rush into the dark zone and enter in there with just a pistol or, just an assault rifle. You'll run out of ammo if you only have 1 gun type really quickly. So although you do kind of have a limited life expectancy with the infection timer, you do still want to take some time and gear up so you don't just go into the next section and die immediately. The same applies in the dark zone before you extract. You do want to gear up in the dark zone before you call in that extraction. So make sure you have 2 purple weapons or better before taking on the hunters. The hunters are extremely hard to kill. They have a lot of health. Not only do they have a decent amount of health, but they heal themselves like almost instantaneously. They make sure you can't use your skills. They're kind of bullshit, to be quite honest, so you do not want to be engaging them with blue weapons. Like, make sure you should probably try to craft high-end weapons, which actually isn't that hard to do. Going around looting a couple of landmarks in the dark zone will get you enough materials usually so that you can craft yourself, a high-end assault rifle or something, and that's going to really help you engage those hunters and extract. So make sure you spend enough time actually getting good enough loot before you attempt the next phase of survival. And lastly, tip number 5, the most important tip, is know where to loot. Now again, this is at the end of the video because it is a mega tip. It's going to encompass a ton of different stuff, but it all does fall under the umbrella of know where to loot. Know where the good loot is going to be. Firstly, helicopter crashes. Off the very beginning of the map, the first thing you want to do is skip that cutscene at the very beginning because you want to load in as quickly as possible. Open your map, first thing, open your map and look for the nearest helicopter crash site. Set a marker there, loot the initial hideout because there's going to be painkillers and fabric in the first hideout you spawn in, but then immediately bust out that door and run to the helicopter crash. If you can get there first, that is going to be huge for your team. Like, you can immediately get a decent blue weapon, like a blue shotgun, a blue SMG, even for yourself or one of your party team members, is going to massively help you out for the rest of the survival game mode. So try to reach the nearest helicopter crash site as quickly as you can. And by the way, every single helicopter crash site I've ever been to has a barrel with fire in it, so if you're freezing by the time you get there, you will be able to heat yourself up once you reach the helicopter crash site. Now, if you don't make it to the crash site first, that's fine. There's several other great places to loot. One of the places you really want to look for off the beginning of survival especially, in fact, you may want to even consider, if it looks like you're not going to get to a crash site first, veering off, and if you pass one of these, going to one of these instead, it's apartments. Open apartments are actually fantastic off the beginning of the game for your loot. Firstly, they're going to have a decent amount of consumables. They're always going to have fridges and likely other places that you're going to get water especially, but food as well, like canned food in fridges and stuff. But also they're going to have a ton of clothes. They're going to have scarves, hats, shirts, pants, all of that stuff is going to be there in abundance to help you survive the cold longer. And every single apartment is going to have either a gear or weapons crate somewhere in it, so you're going to be able to upgrade your loot. So upgrade your chest piece or your gloves or something like that, or if you're lucky enough, get a weapon out of the deal instead. Apartments are usually free of enemies. However, there was one time I walked into the kitchen and there was 2 bad guys standing there that I had to kill. So be aware of that. They're usually going to be completely empty. You can just loot to your heart's content, but there may actually be enemies that spawn inside, so be aware of that. Moving on, dead players are another great way to get loot, especially off the beginning of the game. If you can get to another player's dead body and you can get all of their fabric and weapon parts and electronics and all of that stuff, that is going to massively help you out. Now, there is definitely an issue in PvP. You don't want to go to a dead body that's just been killed by like a 4-man fire team that's waiting for you to come there. But you can actually, if you open your map and go to where the dead body is, it'll tell you what killed that player. So make sure to use that, and if it's killed by an NPC, you might want to go check that out. Be aware that he may have been killed by like a gold or a purple NPC, and you'll have to kill the NPC too, so make sure you can handle that. But also, if you scroll over the body and they've died from freezing to death or from illness, you're pretty much good to go. That means that there isn't any NPCs, likely isn't any NPCs or other players nearby. That player just died, so go and loot that body. Now, of course, you can be a good Samaritan and revive that person, and in my experience, when you do revive people, they tend to actually revive you back if you ever go down. But you also do get a lot of loot off the beginning, so it's really up to you. Moving on though, another great place to get loot is landmarks. All of those purple areas on your map are going to have 2 things. 1, a ton of loot, and 2, a ton of harder to kill enemies. Like, pretty much all of the landmarks are guarded by purple, sometimes gold enemies. However, once you get some blue weapons going within your group, you can seriously start taking on the landmarks, especially the landmarks a little bit further away from the dark zone. Yes, there may be a purple enemy guarding it, but if you can take down that purple enemy with your entire fire team, that enemy is likely to drop blue or better loot himself, and that's not counting all of the loot you can also just get that's in chests, etc. around that landmark. And the last mini tip I have for the know where to loot mega tip is the map is not random. So try to go into the normal division map and see where the electronic stores are, where the mechanics are, all of that stuff, because that is still going to be available in survival mode, especially if you can know where some of the electronic stores are, like kind of near the spawn points in survival mode. That is going to be extremely helpful. Electronics are, essential for crafting, especially what we went over earlier, which is healing skills. So again, memorizing where some electronic stores are and also where, police stations and all of this other stuff are in the normal map is going to help you in the overall survival game mode as as well. You don't need to memorize every single, inch of the map, of course, but just kind of knowing the general location of where certain stores, certain apartment buildings are, etc. is going to help you in survival mode greatly. And that's gonna wrap up my top 5 tips for survival mode in The Division. If you guys have any of your tips, don't be afraid to leave them in the comment section down below, and of course upvote other people's useful tips so that you can see them. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, found it helpful, and if you did, please remember to help me out by simply rating and especially sharing this video. If you want to see more, mainly Destiny, but also potentially The Division content, don't be afraid to slap that subscribe button. Now, if you want to get in touch with me and keep up to date with the latest channel activity, the best way is to follow me on Twitter. That's linked in the description down below at RickCacus, as is my Twitch channel, which you've seen some background gameplay of me streaming this survival. If you guys want to check that out, that again is also linked in the description, twitch.tv/CacusHD. Again, I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, have a good day.